Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I am glad you are here. This morning, the sermon is based off of Mark 1:21 through 28. So I'll read that and then we will get going. Mark 1:21 through 28. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. I'm going to say right off the bat that I have been avoiding preaching a sermon about demons or unclean spirits, in particular demon possession. It makes me uncomfortable. Why? Well, for a couple reasons. First off, it can be kind of creepy to talk about. Have you ever watched one of those exorcism movies? I did one time, and boy was it a mistake. My biggest issue with how demon possession is handled is that some people who are sick do not receive the actual medical diagnosis and treatment that they need, and are instead subject to more trauma in the name of spiritual purification. This is not okay. Anxiety or panic attacks, psychosis, being high on certain drugs, and medical conditions that cause seizures can all result in some behavior that in the ancient world would have been labeled as demon possession. We know now that these folks are not possessed. There is nothing evil about them. They need help, not more harm done. I have calmed multiple people down from panic attacks that, seen from the outside world, with no prior knowledge of the situation, someone might assume that they were possessed. I have held a thrashing woman, desperately trying to keep her from falling down and hurting herself, as she moaned and wailed during some sort of either panic attack, muscle spasm attack, psychotic episode, or drug high. It was terrifying because I thought she might hurt herself or take me down with her on the icy steps. But never once did I worry that she was possessed, because she wasn't. She was sick. She needed stability, medication, and in that moment, someone to hang on to her and tell her that she would be okay. If I had said, "Don't worry, I'm a pastor," and instead of helping her, started performing some sort of exorcism, I would have terrified the poor woman, or possibly led her to believe that she was possessed when that was never on the table in the first place. This could lead to further spiritual and physical peril that would have been unacceptable. There was one time in college when one of my soccer teammates came to me. She told me she was experiencing severe back pain. This was right before I was about to lead a Bible study. And partway through the Bible study, she started rocking back and forth and moaning and arching her back. She started saying, they're winning, over and over again. At this point in my spiritual development, I was less skeptical when it came to talk of spiritual warfare. So I was concerned that she was experiencing some sort of demonic possession. I didn't know what to do, so I ran and got my RD, who took this young woman by her shoulders, said her name, and then started rhythmically snapping, asking her to slow her breathing and focus on the noise she was making with her fingers. Soon the girl started to calm. I was sitting there dumbfounded. I'd never witnessed anything like this. My RD, on the other hand, had helped many people recover from panic attacks. I told my RD that when I had started praying for this young woman, that was when the girl calmed down. And the RD said very carefully, "Mariah, please be cautious if you mention that to this young woman. If you bring up the spiritual element," she continued, let me back up. "Please be cautious if you mention that to the girl. You need to understand that because she has this back pain, she hasn't slept for almost a week. You may freak her out and stress her out more than she already is if you bring up a spiritual element." She continued, "What I witnessed here was an overly exhausted girl who was in so much pain that her body couldn't take it anymore." They eventually, I believe, got her muscle relaxants and she went to physical therapy. Again, if I had brought up a spiritual component in this instance, it could have made things worse for a young, impressionable girl who just needed to sleep and heal her body. So if in most cases it is completely inappropriate to assume someone is possessed, what do we do about the passages in the Bible where Jesus performs an exorcism? What about this passage we read in Mark? Jesus' very first act of ministry in the Gospel of Mark was this exorcism of sorts. In the ancient world of Jesus' time, physical ailments were not thought of as just physical ailments. They believed that if you had leprosy, then it was punishment for some sin that you have committed. Not only were you socially ostracized to prevent spread of this disease, you were deemed spiritually sinful. Purity laws, physical ailments, bodily taboos, spiritual warfare, these were all irrevocably intertwined. That's why when Jesus would heal someone, he would sometimes also say, "Your sins are forgiven." Forgiving sins was a form of healing, not just wiping your metaphorical sin scoreboard clean. They used to believe in the ancient world, especially from a Greek worldview, that the order of the household and society was a microcosm of the order of the universe. Everything had its place. Everything was connected. What happened at a micro level was a result of something happening at a macro, spiritual, cosmic, or supernatural level. So while we might see someone having a seizure as someone who suffers from epilepsy, in the ancient worldview, they would have interpreted this as a spiritual battlefield. Just as good and evil were fighting at a cosmic level, good and evil were fighting inside of this person. I want to be clear here. I am not so arrogant to assert that I know everything there is to know about the universe, about the existence of demons and angels or spiritual warfare, about what all goes on in people's hearts. Like in the quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." I believe that science, medicine, and spirituality can all make sense of one another rather than canceling each other out. I also believe that you can't carve neat lines in life between the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, the holy, the ordinary, the supernatural. We are complex beings existing in a complex universe. What I will not do is abuse my role as a spiritual leader, pretending to know the solution to someone's problem. That's the thing with Jesus, is he somehow knew exactly what each person he met needed. Have you noticed how careful and specific his interactions, miracles, and teachings are? For example, the rich young ruler, he instructed that man to give away all that he had. The woman at the well, instead of ignoring her like the rest of society, he saw her. He understood her. He engaged and listened to her. Jesus' healings and miracles were more than just publicity stunts. He wasn't going around healing people just to spread his message. He was meeting needs. He was breaking taboos. He was touching the unclean. He was healing on the Sabbath, giving hope to the ones pushed to the fringes of society. He was pushing the spiritual leaders to go deeper than dogma. Jesus' ministry was holistic. And today, again, we see Jesus demonstrate his uncanny ability to know exactly what this person needs. This man, in the clutches of an unclean spirit, approached Jesus suddenly, in the synagogue of all places. So picture like in the middle of a church service. And the man cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now let's carefully look at what exactly this man says. First of all, he names Jesus and then he almost challenges him. Because Jesus was teaching as one with authority, this man, or whatever spoke from him, wanted to know where Jesus was going with his teachings. Was he going to be the one to tackle evil, to shine a light in the darkest corners of the world? Then, and this is important, the man gave a title to Jesus that no one had given him thus far. The man calls him Holy One of God. And you have to remember, we know the end of the story. We know that Jesus is the Son of God. But you have to look at this story as if you were just someone in the synagogue trying to worship. Then a man you probably don't recognize starts teaching. But he wasn't teaching like the other scribes. There's something different about him. The questions about this man would be buzzing through the brains of the onlookers. Picture me preaching, okay? And then someone you don't know from the audience gets up and starts giving their own sermon. You would probably be confused. You might ask yourself, who does this person think he is? Who gave him the authority to speak like this in church? Then imagine another person entering the scene, acting very strangely, again, someone you don't know, and this person says to the person teaching, "You are divine. You are of God." Again, we know that this is Jesus he's talking about, but others don't. This is blasphemous, in the synagogue, no less. This whole situation is strange and confusing, but it only gets more bizarre. Jesus responds to the man crying out, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Then the man thrashes around and cries out with a loud voice, and the unclean spirit leaves him. So if you've seen an exorcism or any of the terrifying exorcism movies, you will know that it's a whole thing. There are props, incense, there's a lot of waving a cross around, there's proper language to use. Yet Jesus says all of 6 words, no spells, no bells, and the man is restored. 2 things to note about this story. 1, notice how Jesus did not do as the voice from the man said he would. The voice said almost tauntingly, "Have you come to destroy us?" But nowhere in the text does it say anything about Jesus destroying the unclean spirit. All he does is heal the man. All he does is free this man of that which was binding him. Jesus didn't destroy the spirit. All he did was expose it, calling it into the light. The spirit then went away, or did whatever spirits do. The evil part took care of itself. Jesus didn't destroy, he exposed, he freed, and he healed. Remember this as we get to my next point. I hate to say it and burst any bubbles, but this story isn't even really about demon possession at all. This story is told to highlight 1, the identity of Jesus, and 2, the depths of Jesus's power and authority. Now remember, the original audience for the Gospel of Mark were people who existed years after Jesus was already dead. This gospel was written to tell his story, to tell people about the kind of man Jesus was. So instead of simply saying, Hey, Jesus was a man who came to earth, but he was also divine. He was super powerful and carried much authority. Oh, and this authority came from God, the creator of heaven and earth. Mark did start off his gospel with a declaration similar to this, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. So he went on to show the breadth and depth of Jesus' humanity, divinity, power, and authority. Because these people existed in a worldview that saw physical unrest and ailments as spiritual problems as well, the author of Mark wanted to show that Jesus had the power to cure both the physical while also having the authority over the spiritual. Jesus could do it all. Teach with authority and then heal someone with a complicated physical and spiritual ailment, all in a day's work. The first chapter of Mark is almost like an argumentative essay, with Mark's thesis being, Jesus is the anointed one we have been waiting for, the Son of God. Then he goes on to prove his arguments by giving examples that illustrate his point. One example being his teaching in the temple and his healing of the man with the unclean spirit. Like I said before, the ancient world believed, like the Greek saying goes, as above, so below. This means that Mark was telling the story to foreshadow the work Jesus would do on the cross and in his resurrection. He was basically saying, oh, you think it's cool Jesus had the authority over this unclean spirit? Wait until you see what he accomplishes on the cross. Now, going back to what I said about how Jesus doesn't destroy the evil spirit, rather he exposed it. He didn't destroy it, he took its power away from it. Or rather, he exposed the fact that it never had any true power to begin with. I believe that is also what Jesus did on the cross and in his resurrection. We know that Jesus didn't get rid of evil. We see devastation in our personal lives on the news. We know that pain and darkness persist. But what Jesus did to this man and what Jesus did on the cross was almost more profound and extraordinary than destroying evil. He didn't destroy evil, he exposed it. He shone a light on what humans are capable of. He exposed the ways in which government and religion can be corrupted. He said, you want to be healed? Then why don't you take a good look in the mirror and let's see what we see. He did not scapegoat those people out there. He helped people see how they were putting trust and power in the wrong place. He helped people turn inside before they would go and turn against others on the outside. Where we shine a light, where we expose wrongdoing, I wonder if we too can release those in bondage, and in turn, evil will end up defeating itself. If you want to learn more about this idea of evil defeating itself, read anything by Walter Wink. Jesus showed that no matter how much power some darkness seems to carry, it is not true power. Not if it can be vanquished by the true power of selfless love that we saw with Jesus on the cross. Think about what Jesus did for the man, how he exposed the unclean spirit and released the man from the bondage, evil defeating itself, revealing that it never had any true power to begin with. And now imagine that on the massive scale of the cross. I want to leave us today with some questions for pondering. What binds you? What keeps you from living into the fullest expression of your exquisite humanity? What is your go-to self-destructive act? Another way of asking this would be, how do you bind yourself? Where might you shine a light on corruption, domination, or hatred? Could you be the one who exposes the dark underbelly, who exposes evil so that it eventually, inevitably defeats itself? The unclean powers of the world, racism, homophobia, sexism, xenophobia, transphobia, ageism, white supremacy, corruption, exploitation, environmental destruction, unchecked capitalism, etc. How can we release ourselves from the bind that they have on our lives? Can we shine a light and expose the darkness that they carry? How can we take responsibility for what binds us rather than sitting comfortably in the excuse that it's beyond our control? I promise you, the devil did not make you do it. There is no true power there. Any power anything has over you, you gave it the power in that first place. You gave it the power in the first place. Remember where your true source of power lies. How can we live into the power and authority that Jesus carried? Can we trust that he showed us a path toward healing and wholeness? Are we ready to take that path? Even if it is terribly uncomfortable and shines a light on that which we would prefer to stay hidden. In all of this, may we rest in the healing embrace of Jesus. Amen. I will leave you with this blessing. May you go into this week and bind close to that which is of God. May you shine a light into the darkness and expose that which needs to come out. May you go and be drawn into the love of God, your creator, your healer, your redeemer. Amen. Go in peace.